I'll go into just a little synopsis of it. It's okay, I can cut that out. Um,
Ladies and gentlemen, prepare for a cinematic odyssey through the 100 greatest films spanning from the roaring 1920s to the cutting-edge masterpieces of 2024. Carefully curated from the lovely people on Letterboxd. Two intrepid souls embark on a journey through a treasure trove of timeless classics and groundbreaking contemporary works, where each frame embodies the enduring magic of the silver screen. Grab your popcorn and join us on this epic expedition through a century of cinematic excellence, where every film promises to enchant, inspire, and leave an indelible mark on the soul. And now, for your listening pleasure, here are the LetterBros.
Welcome everybody to the third episode of LetterBros. I am Felix. I have my friend Parker here. How we doing, buddy?
Feeling cinematic. How are you doing?
I'm feeling old, like this movie that we're
You're
gonna
not
be
quite as
reviewing
old.
today. Yeah, I feel like it today, dude. I was like, I think I have onset arthritis. I was like, my hands are hurting, but no, I'm fine. I'm just being dramatic. But again, welcome again, everybody, to Letter Bros, where we watch 100 movies from 100 years and we let a wheel decide which movie we're going to watch next. As you know, we've been getting all of these movies from Letterboxd, from their top 250 narrative films of all time. And last time we watched Sunset Boulevard and we spun the wheel and it gave us Sherlock Jr., which is the oldest movie on this list from 1924. But Sherlock Jr. is a silent comedy film from 1924, directed by and starring Buster Keaton. The film centers on a meek and clumsy movie projectionist who dreams of becoming a detective. When he is falsely accused of stealing a pocket watch, he falls asleep in the projection booth and dreams that he steps into the movie screen, transforming into the suave and competent detective Sherlock Jr. And I mean, pretty simple premise. I mean, it's a silent film, so you have to give the premise a lot of just physical comedy, which we see a bunch of in this movie. But I'll just go ahead and start it off with just saying, what did you think of the movie? First off,
Yeah, so definitely interesting. Obviously, this is the top 250 narrative feature length films on Letterboxd, and we kind of discussed it briefly beforehand. I personally wouldn't consider this a feature film, but you did make a good point that, like, for the time, it was a feature length film, which I
hmm
guess allows it to take place on this list. But it is only a 44-minute film, and so I found it, easy to just sit down and watch on YouTube for free.
yeah,
And I enjoyed it. I thought it was a lot of fun. It brought me back to my freshman year of college when I took a history of motion picture course. I think I said the same thing about Sunset Boulevard, but just something about like the black and white classic films that's bringing me back. And we did watch a lot of silent films as well. So it's probably the first silent film I've watched since then.
yeah.
But I'm glad that it was this one because it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy watch, and it was pretty funny. It kept me entertained the whole time. We'll get into it a little bit deeper. Obviously, with silent films, just by nature, you're limited in the depth of the story that you're able to tell, and the amount of range that you're able to show in terms of acting. And like you said, a lot of it boils down to the physical comedy and the physical storytelling and the cue cards when needed. And I like that they didn't overuse any of the cue cards. I've seen some silent films before where it's just like cue card after cue card after cue card of just massive blocks of text. And
Which is
this really
funny because
allowed
that's what I thought we were gonna get with this movie. Like I literally have it here in the notes. I'm like, there's not a lot of dialogue, obviously, with it being a silent film, but
Mhm.
there's not a lot of like, yeah, dialogue. That it was all, it's all laid down on just the physical acting of everybody involved in the movie, and it made for a very good time.
And the set pieces. There were some really
hmm
fun set pieces in this, in the theater scene when he falls
Insane.
asleep. Super cool. Almost like magic, where I'm like, how do they even do this?
Which
Was
I
really
have
cool.
tons of. I went down a rabbit hole of stuff about Buster Keaton and his his stunt work and how he did some of these effects, and just we will get into it. Don't you
Yeah,
worry.
I
And
mean,
the music too. It was something I was very big into.
it held up great in terms of the effects that were put to use, and I'm glad that you dove down that rabbit hole because I'm really curious. I mean, you've seen films in the past 10 years attempt some of these stunts on a similar level, so to speak, and it just looks like shit because they're dependent on CGI and After Effects and everything along those lines. But yeah, I thought it was a really good time. I think there were some qualms that I still had about it, just in terms of, I guess, the storyline, which there isn't much of one, which I suppose is the point. But it definitely is a sharp contrast, I think, to Sunset Boulevard, which is such a deep character study and a, prolonged, slow burn kind of genuine story, with very little in the way of comedy or physicality. So it was a massive switch up, and I'm glad. I don't know if I could have handled two Sunset Boulevards in a row. Um,
Yeah.
but it was a lot of fun. It was entertaining. It felt like an episode of TV, if I'm being honest.
Hmm.
So that
And I
could be a
mean,
good
that's
thing
just
and a
the
bad.
limitations of what they had back in the 1920s. But to your point, yeah, like I felt like I was watching like a cartoon with real people in it. With that, again, this movie has been out for 100 years. So if you haven't seen it, please do. It's everywhere. It officially entered the public domain. It's on YouTube with, no sort of drawbacks from it. Like you're not hurting anybody by watching it on YouTube because it is available for everybody legally. So do yourself a favor, go watch it. It's a good time. It's fun. I really think you should give it a nice little gander. But
Yeah,
we
even if
will.
you've never seen a silent film before and you're not really into the whole silent film thing, it doesn't
Mhm.
feel like you're in class. Like it just feels
It
fun.
doesn't. And
It
that's
doesn't
the
feel
thing. I felt like, going in, this was like, I have it here on my notes. This was also my first silent film, so I didn't really know how it was going to play out. This is a good first silent film for anybody to watch. Like, it's
Mhm.
entertaining. It leaves you thinking, like, one, how did they do this? And two, what was the movie experience like when this came out in 1924?
It had to be such a ball, such a riot, dude.
Hmm.
And did you notice the live orchestra in the movie theater sequences?
Yeah, so exactly, that's how they played silent films. Because when I was looking into it, I wanted to see like who wrote this score, because the music was incredible. I
And
thought it was like the
and
most fun
nonstop.
part of the movie.
The
Hmm.
music, there's no stop to the score pretty much throughout the entire, and that's common
Hmm.
with a lot of silent films, but it
Yeah,
played
because I
very
mean,
well, and
when
there were
you
a lot of
watched it in 1924, if the orchestra wasn't there, you're literally looking at just moving pictures. Like there's nothing
Mhm.
going on, and maybe a projector hum in the background, but like that's it. That's all you're listening to. So the music keeps it engaging, and it almost adds like that level of depth to Buster Keaton's character. Like it makes it a level of depth. Which, to be fair, he's probably almost died like 5 or 6 times in that movie, and every time I was literally like, "What is this man doing?" Like, so. But again, this is the spoiler zone, even though there's not really like a story to spoil, but
It's
a
been
lot
out
of the
100 years.
correct, but a lot of the stunts are insane. Again, to your point, the movie experience back then obviously was very different. People would go watch a movie and there would be a live orchestra accompanying it every night. I believe that they would have some sort of score that they composed for the film, but because they couldn't record sound, they had to do it right there and then. They rehearsed before everybody came in, and they would just play the movie, and they would play the music for everybody. So going deeper into it.
Hey, it's me. I did a bit of research after we had recorded the podcast, and I found a couple different things that contradicted what I said on the actual podcast. It turns out that a lot of theaters during the silent film era either had a full orchestra if they had the budget, or if it was cheaper, they would just have a pianist do an accompany for it. They would have some scores, but there wasn't really an official one to accompany a movie like Sherlock Jr. So a lot of times, the experience for some people that may have watched it and had listened to the music for their first time watching it may have been different from other people that may have seen the film, which is funny because that's exactly how the YouTube experience was as well, because I had seen the film twice, and when I noticed it the second time that it looked a little bit different, it didn't look as crisp as the first time that I watched it, because the first time I watched it was a full 4K restoration of the film. The one that I saw the day that we recorded to kind of prepare, because it had been a while since we recorded versus when I saw the movie initially, was by Laurel and Hardy, while the one that I initially got my first experience with Sherlock Jr. with that amazing 4K restoration was done by a channel called Simon Templar Films, which I will put up right over here, because that was what I believe to be my definitive experience and had a completely different score than the one by Laurel and Hardy. And turns out that almost every one that I see on YouTube has a different score for each one, which kind of makes it an incredible experience overall. Again, this movie did enter the public domain in 2020, so people are able to interpret it in their own way musically, just like they did back in 1924, which is just an amazing thing to when you think about it, because now people have their different interpretations of how the music makes the movie and what they think the music would sound like in certain parts of the film, which I thought was really cool. So again, while Laurel and Hardy did prepare me for the initial day of the podcast, my initial experience and what I believe was my favorite interpretation of the film was the 4K restoration by Simon Templar Films. And with that being said, the Clubfoot Orchestra was what is officially credited on Wikipedia as the people who made the score back in 1993. I'm guessing when the film was, put onto film and restored, but the history of this film is a little bit messy and there's not a lot of information regarding it. In particular, the score, when you type it in, there's 3 different answers as to who actually scored this film, and all of them are within the 1990s. But again, the Clubfoot Orchestra version that you hear is the one that is in the Laurel and Hardy YouTube channel. So if you want to listen to that one, go check that one out. But if you want to listen to the score that I thought was truly the best, go check out that 4K restoration by Simon Templar Films. Okay, now back to the video. Bye.
They composed music for it when they were able to finally get it either on film or digital. It was the music that we heard, because you watched it on YouTube, obviously. And there's a couple different YouTube channels that have it on there. They uploaded this beautiful 4K restoration of the movie, and I would have thought this would have been just a student film that somebody made with kind of having let's make a silent film, but let's make it in 2024. I would have never known that this was a film that was made 100 years ago. It looks crisp and beautiful, and again, the music was amazing. It added so much character to the movie, and it was made by a group of people called the Clubfoot Orchestra back in 1999, and the one that we saw with that music, it was performed by the Montalto Motion Picture Orchestra in 2010. So there's a lot of collaboration, which I was very surprised by, that the Clubfoot Orchestra have scored a lot of silent films. They also did Metropolis. So they have scored a lot of these movies to kind of bring them new life and bring them to a new audience. And something that you'll find interesting, Parker, is in 1952, the movie was restored by Lowe's Incorporated.
Yes, there's actually a pamphlet in the first 10 minutes of the film that says Lowe's Incorporated.
Yeah.
Right there.
I have that on that note too. It was insane to think that it goes all the way back to the 1920s, man. Lowe's is deep in the movie industry, man. I know they had their theaters for a while back, and just it's crazy to see where they're at now.
And for those who don't know, Lowe's is now the company that operates the hotels over at the Universal theme parks, which is why Felix and I find it kind of interesting that a hotel chain's parent company all the way back in 1924 had a prominent shot in this
Hmm.
silent film. Just an interesting little
Exactly.
fun fact.
I know. I was
Well,
like, oh my, like literally giving the like Leonardo DiCaprio pointing at the screen, like, oh my God, look at that.
yeah. Yeah, I'm glad that you also saw that. I wasn't sure. I was going to bring it up if you hadn't mentioned it.
No, dude, I had like 5 notes about it. Like, dude, oh my God, Lowe's? That's insane. They're so old.
So not only was the score incredible, and it's crazy to think that you could go to a theater and see a live score, but the stunts and the way that the film is edited are amazing. So
It's
I
it's
want to know what your
bonkers.
favorite or most mind blowing stunt was in this 44-minute silent film, because
So
there
I
are
have
quite a
a
few.
no, there were quite a few, but there was one that's notable that almost this one almost killed Buster Keaton on set. So it's the stunt where he's on the train car, which first of all, he's walking on actual train cars, which is insane. I don't know what his obsession is with trains, but he's running on top of them. He grabs onto a chain that's connected to a water tank, and it gushes gallons of water onto him. And when he did that, the water flooded down on Keaton much harder than anticipated, throwing him to the ground, which I think is the shot that we see in the film. The back of Keaton's neck slammed against a steel rail on the ground and caused him to black out. The pain was so intense that Keaton had to stop shooting later that day, and he had blinding headaches for weeks afterwards, but continued working, having a well known high threshold for physical pain.
Oh my gosh.
So
Dude is
it,
the
it
Tom
make,
Cruise of his time.
but that's the thing. Like, I feel like Tom Cruise, even doing like the stunts that he's doing, like, there's a bunch of safety measures that go into it. Like,
Mhm.
Tom Cruise thinks I'm gonna go and grab onto the side of this plane while it's taking off, but you have people in the background, like, maybe there's another plane in the back, like with some parachuters that just in case he slips off, he's gonna catch them. Like, Buster Keaton's out here being like, I want to climb on some trains, grab onto a chain, and just like let the water gush out. And they're like, all right, dude, go for it. We'll start the camera.
Yeah, I mean that's just a product of how
I
times
don't
have
think
changed.
I don't think OSHA was a thing back in 1924, but it certainly would have helped out. Which again, I don't understand how, like, with all of this, all of the stuff that Buster Keaton has gone to, that he was able to live so long to not only end up in Sunset Boulevard, but he lived to be 70 years old after all of the injuries that he sustained. Like, he's the original jackass.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Mhm.
I mean that's not even the craziest stunt I would have thought. Like if I had to guess which one had almost killed him, I
Mhm.
wouldn't have guessed the water tank on the railroad.
I think I know which one you're talking about, but give it to me.
I think it would have been when he's driving on the that
Mm.
collapse. And there's
Yes.
a sequence where he's driving this old car and there's a gap in a bridge and two trucks converge just enough time to give him a platform to ride across to the other side of the bridge. And then on
Yeah,
another section of the bridge, the whole bridge just completely collapses to allow him to keep driving on along the road. And I
it's
just don't know how
nuts.
like it had to be forced perspective. I maybe if I had to take a guess where he's actually driving on something that is not seen by the camera. And
Hmm.
instead, they have a forced perspective bridge lined up perfectly with where he is driving. And
Which,
they,
that's a good point, because I'm sure like a lot of these shots, he's like, I'm not gonna go and do that. I'm not gonna drive on a collapsing bridge. Like,
oh,
there's
yeah,
some form of common sense. Because I mean, he's had a lot of these shots where there's some sort of like magic
right.
involved. Like, there's the shot where he dives through a woman.
Yes. So that was probably my favorite and most like where mind blowing. I was so
Yeah.
confused. Go on about it though. I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah, so that one, it was, I have to find it here. That
While you're finding it, I'll
so
describe it. Basically, he's running
Yeah.
away from these people, these thieves that he's investigating, and this is in his long dream sequence. Which, sidebar, I think the dream sequence was probably my favorite part of the movie
It's the
altogether
best part of the movie.
by far.
Absolutely, it is.
And during this dream sequence, he's running from the thieves, and there is a woman around a corner with like a little shop, a fold-out table on her chest, essentially, and she's selling these ties, and she's pointing to the table, which is where her stomach is, essentially. And Sherlock Jr. just runs straight through her and dives through her torso
It's
into and
amazing,
then
dude.
through a fence
It
into a
was
little secret
awesome.
room. And it looks like something out of a Las Vegas magic show. Do you have how they did it?
Yeah, so at first, like this was hailed as his best stunt. Like nobody knew how Buster had done this stunt, and he never really gave out the secret. But you know, it's been out for 100 years. Somebody was bound to figure it out.
Hmm.
Um, so the man playing the woman is actually suspended on a plank above an unseen hole. So like you see that the woman is dressed in like very loose clothing, like it's almost like a sheet that she's wearing. So the head of the person is on a plank above it. So I'm sure it's just like this the veil is over his head, and what he's going through is just an unseen hole in the costume and a fence that Keaton jumps through, because you see there's a fence behind the woman in the shot. So he just essentially jumps through this loose sheet, but like you couldn't tell. Like it's not like the bottom of the sheet went with him. Like the shot was taken perfectly to make it look like Buster Keaton just jumped through an actual human being.
Yeah, that's kind of cool. They do similar stuff to that at Halloween Horror Nights as well, where they have like whenever they have a character put their hand through someone or something along those lines, they have
Yeah.
similar tactics. So it's kind of like the classic magic trick where you're sawing a box in half, right? And it's just two separate people that you can only
Yeah.
see certain parts of them. There's another jumping stunt in this film in which he jumps through a window, and he had set something up prior to completely change his outfit once he jumps through the window in order to
Yes.
get away from these thieves. That was also pretty
When he
incredible.
jumps through the window feet first and like kicks a dude out of the other window,
Another
like
one. Yep. Hmm.
it was, dude, there's a lot of like crazy stuff in this movie that like even by 100 years ago I was still blown away by like how did they do that, and why has like nobody else tried to do like even reattempt this stuff like now. Like in one of the dream sequences, like Sherlock and the Sheik are like the Sheik tells Sherlock, "Oh, let's play some pool." Like not tells him, but is just kind of like,
Hmm.
play some pool." And unbeknownst to Sherlock, the Sheik had placed what the I think the 8 ball or the 13 ball is a bomb that explodes upon impact. But Buster Keaton cleans this pool table. Like he's out here doing curveballs. Like just he's killing this pool table, and just the physical comedy of the Sheik and the other person that's with him that are trying to kill Buster Keaton is just it made the movie like that much funnier. And just like Buster Keaton is an absolute genius when it comes to like creating these shots that you wouldn't even believe could actually happen in real life, but somehow he made it possible.
Hmm.
And something else that I thought was really crazy. Well, first off, the whole premise of the movie was a brainchild, obviously, by Buster Keaton. That first sort of like illusion when he walks into the movie theater, like into the screen, was what gave Buster the idea for the entire movie. He was like, the reason for making the whole picture was him walking into the screen. And that was just the one situation that bubbled up into this entire film.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of shots when he's in the screen where it's all of these crazy transitions into different environments. Like he's on a cliff, he's in the water, he's with actual lions. Like I'm sure there was lion taming back in those days, but like he's out there with actual lions.
Hmm.
It's insane.
That's interesting that was the seed for the whole film, because I think it
Because I mean,
brings
it
to light.
again, it starts the entire dream sequence, which to your point, it made the film. It was the best. Like it was where we saw all the craziest stuff happening.
Definitely. And that's where I'll get into I'll start picking some nits in terms of what I didn't like about Sherlock Jr. because uh,
Hmm.
and obviously take everything that we say kind of with your own taste and with a grain of salt. All of the movies that we're talking about are objectively great and influential movies. So in
Hmm.
order for us to have an actual discussion, there needs to be something that we feel could be improved in most cases. So not knocking the picture by any means, but
Go
what
knock on Buster Keaton's door right now, dude.
and tell him.
Go knock on
I
his
think
grave. Be like, buddy,
I
come
think that
on,
the
dude.
film basically could have like the dream sequence was definitely the best part of the film. I thought that the prior to the dream sequence was not as entertaining, though it was still funny. Um,
Yeah.
and also, I felt as though there were some gags in which the repetition was a little too repetitious. And I get that there is humor in repetition. It's my own personal taste. For example, when he was inside of the theater screen, it was like 2.5 or 3 solid minutes of it just rotating to different pictures. And it was really entertaining, but I was like, okay, I get it. We can move on. But that's my own personal knock, and it's not a
Mhm.
major one.
No, and I
Um,
think that's just more so of like what the average attention span was back in
fair
1924. Like
enough.
you
Fair enough.
see like the success of TikTok, like everything it's successful because it's just like a couple seconds of just entertainment, and if you don't like it, you can just swipe up to the next one because it doesn't catch your attention. Like people watching this on a screen and not only just being blown away by the stunts that he's performing and the magic that he's doing, but
Mhm.
just watching a movie back then, like movies didn't come out as often as they do now. So I think that's just more of a matter of the attention span. But I
I
do get
suppose.
what you're
I mean,
saying that like
I
the
would argue though too. I mean, I watch 3.5 hour long movies sometimes that I think are great and kept me entertained the whole time.
that's
So
fair.
it's just a matter of personal preference. I didn't hate it for that. I just felt as though it wasn't progressing
Hmm.
anything, and I wasn't expecting a major, like,
Yeah,
profound or
like the joke was
particularly
getting
interesting,
dry.
like, storyline, but I did want it to progress a little bit at that point, and yeah, so just a minor knock, a minor little thought that I wanted to bring up.
No, I get that.
But
I
you
did
wanna hop
think
into
that
the
the gag where he was like digging through the trash to try and find money to get his girlfriend like the more expensive
Oh, yeah, that was
like
great.
treat,
That was really funny.
that one was really funny. I just it felt like it was a little bit long, but again, like it was a big payoff for it. Like after the second woman came up, I'm like, didn't we just see a woman come up to ask
Definitely.
for $1? Like, but then again, it builds up. It's that rule of three. Like the first woman comes up and she really needs the dollar, so he goes and gives it to her. Second woman sees, oh, this guy's giving out money. Can you just give me $1?
True.
And then
I
the
think
third,
you hit the nail on the head there, though, in the sense that there was a payoff. So that sequence, for example, I liked it. I thought it was really funny. And at the very end, when he's looking at the screen and mimicking it, and then at the
yeah.
end it jumps forward and they're a family with like 3 kids, and he's like, "Well, shit, what do I do now?" And it just ends. Like that was really funny. It went back to it a couple of times, but it still had a payoff.
Hmm.
So I found it rewarding. The theater
Exactly.
sequence, which is why I think it's interesting that the theater sequence was the seed for the film. It didn't have a payoff. It was basically just showcasing a funny gag. It was, you
Hmm.
know, and then it brought
It
you
was
into
a
the
show
dream
off for the
sequence.
special effects. Like it
Right.
was just like,
Exactly.
let's watch Buster Keaton go through these transitions and maybe that's what it was. Like maybe it was just projections on the wall like from behind him, but like you couldn't tell. Like those he
No,
looked
yeah.
like he was in those scenes.
To be fair, I mean, it's so well executed, especially just for
Hmm.
its time. Even not even putting the parameter of its time in quotes on there. It's just
Yeah,
impressive. But yeah, the payoff wasn't quite as there with that gag, in my opinion. But
exactly.
you want to hop into the rankings?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right.
Rankings. So I feel like my rankings were based off of just like I wrote this after I went down my Buster Keaton rabbit hole. Um, so just going into the first one, which is enjoyability and rewatchability, I gave this a 12. I could, again, with this not having a lot of dialogue and sound, I feel like this was a good movie to just like literally turn your brain off and just watch it and just laugh. Like a lot of the humor from this, again, I thought it was going to be very topical and of its time, but it's like what you said in the last episode. These movies that are on this list are classics for a reason. They stand the test of time. And I mean, the humor in it is genius and it's timeless. So I could go back and watch this movie a couple more times. Like I watched it right before we recorded this video just to like have it fresh in my mind, and I was enjoying it just as much as I saw it the first time. The story, I gave it a 9 out of 15 just because again, I feel like to the point of, the stunt of him walking into the theater is what made the movie. Like it's what literally planted the seed of this movie, and I felt like the story was kind of an afterthought. That it's something to draw people in to come and watch all of these crazy things that are going to happen in this movie. Like guy gets framed for stealing a pocket watch. That's the movie. Just come in. You're going to see a whole bunch of crazy stuff. Don't worry about it. So for that, I gave it about I would actually even change that to a 7 out of 15. Because again, the story is not the reason why I'm watching a Buster Keaton film. It's because I want to see Buster Keaton almost unalive himself on screen. And it's amazing. Again, amazing how he lived to be 70 years old. It's crazy. Lasting impression, I gave it a 12. With this being my first silent film, I again was going into it thinking like I'm either going to be bored or it's going to be a lot of these awkward transitions from going from a scene to a cue card, like you said earlier. But it didn't feel like that. There wasn't really a lot of dialogue. Like the movie knew, again, like the story is the afterthought. You're here to watch a moving picture and you're here to see some crazy stuff on a moving picture. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what I got out of it. And definitely left an impression. I definitely watched a lot more Buster Keaton films after that. And here we are still talking about it. Visual and auditory appeal. Again, the visuals were insane. All of the stunts that we saw were, for the most part, practical, and all the magic included in it was amazing. And again, the music was outstanding. So I ended up giving that an 8 out of 10. Pacing, I am gonna just knock it, just like what you said. Like the beginning of the film kind of just felt like kind of nonsense until we got to the dream sequence, and that's when stuff started just like kicking into high gear. So I'm gonna go ahead and give that a 6 out of 10. Acting, I had a hard time kind of giving this a rating just because it's a silent film. It's a lot of physical acting, and going into it, I'm like, what are they gonna do? But again, a lot of like the the cast's physical acting made the movie. Like Buster Keaton he is known for his deadpan expression. It's his trademark. It's what you see on every single poster that he's on. It's just that facial expression, but his physicality is unmatched. But because of just the other performances in the movie, like Buster was definitely carrying the rest of that. I'm gonna give it an 8 out of 10. Suspension of disbelief. Again, we go into a dream sequence, and that is like the best part of the movie. Honestly, I didn't even feel like we were in a dream sequence at some points. Like, yes, we saw him
Right.
fall asleep. We saw him like become like have an out of body experience, but there were points in the movie where I'm like, are we still in this dream or are we just like in real life? Like when did he just
Right.
become a detective? Like I don't really know. So in that aspect, that's why I gave it. I'm actually going to drop it to a 6 out of 10. Because there were points where I'm like, I don't really know where we are, but oh my god, he just did this really cool thing, so I don't really care.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Originality, 9 out of 10. I mean, this movie is 100 years old and it's doing stuff that like people wouldn't even think of doing in 2024. Like climbing on train cars, pulling water tanks with gallons of water on you, like driving through collapsing bridges, going down like it was the most original thing to come out for its time, but it is something that is timeless. So that's why I gave it a 9 out of 10. And then just, with all of the like the rabbit hole that I went down on, this movie has given me such an appreciation for not only Buster Keaton, but for the silent film era in general. And that's why it is holding a very nice place in my heart, with a 4 out of 5 for attachment. So with that, that puts my score at a 72.
All right. And you gave Sunset Boulevard a
I gave it I think it was a 77.
77.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's interesting because I remember you texted me after you finished Sherlock Jr. that you felt you liked it a lot more than Sunset Boulevard. Like
And
you were
that's what I'm
having a much
thinking
better time
too.
with it.
And I was, but again, like a lot of it was just like thinking about it more. Like, yes, the comedy aspect of it and the stunts were what drew me in to
Hmm.
the movie. But like everything else around it, I was just kind of like, whatever. Like, it's the story is not why I'm watching this. Like, that's why I ended up watching The General right after Sherlock Jr. because that's the one with the train stunt, and I just wanted to
Right.
see the context of that. But then after that, I watched Steamboat Bill Jr. because that's the stunt where the house falls over him,
Oh yes. Hmm.
which I was like, I need to see this in context. But then after that, it was just mainly like, I don't really want to watch the whole movie. I just want to see the stunt. And I
Sure.
just ended up watching a compilation of his stunts on
Yeah, I
YouTube.
think there's something to be said about like the way that we are ranking the movies too, because it allows you to like, yes, this was a much easier movie to watch than Sunset Boulevard. It was,
Absolutely. And more
frankly, it was,
enjoyable. Like you
yeah.
didn't feel like a sense of dread. Like you felt pure. You felt wholesome after that. And it was just
Mhm.
like it was just nicer to watch. Like we're not watching Norma Desmond like try to kill herself, or we're not watching Joe try like just kind of slugging around being a douchebag. Like
Yeah, but it was interesting to see your breakdown of it in this sense, so I can see, because yeah, I agree with you. This was a more entertaining movie. I think I liked it personally better than Sunset Boulevard, but Sunset Boulevard is such a nuanced piece of work that it allows it to carry itself and stronger in different
mhm.
categories. Um,
Yeah. It's a different
so
experience. Like you're watching Sunset Boulevard because you want to watch the story and the actual like acting performances. You're watching Buster Keaton because you want to see him just top any other crazy stuff he's done before.
yeah. So with that being said, I'll hop into my breakdown for Sherlock Jr.
Yeah. I'll get you hyped
Enjoyability
up.
and rewatchability. Actually, let me spoil my ranking beforehand as well,
Yeah.
because I think it's interesting and to kind of compare to the prior movie that we just watched. I actually end up giving Sherlock Jr. a 70 out of 100, which is
Ooh.
the exact same that I gave Sunset Boulevard, but for completely different
Okay,
reasons.
yeah, that's true.
So my ranking for enjoyability and rewatchability for Sherlock Jr. is a 9 out of 15. I found it very entertaining. There's tons of other movies that I would just click on before I clicked on Sherlock Jr. for just a night that I wanted to hang out, do nothing, and watch a movie that I love. This does not fall into that category of movies, but I still find it to be highly enjoyable. So I give it a little bit on the higher side with a 9 out of 15. For the story, I
Oh,
gave it a 7 out of 15, same as you.
yeah.
For the exact reason that you said, the I try to rank each category within the context of the movie, and the movie didn't necessarily need a very detailed story, but I felt that it still served its purpose very well and allowed all of the stunts to happen in a natural progression. So I found like the detective farce to be important to a degree. You had pieces such as the explosive cue ball that came back later in the plot line, the book constantly being referenced and mimicked, like when it says shadow everybody closely, and he's walking in lockstep with the mustachioed gentleman that he believes to have stolen the
Oh
pocket watch.
yeah.
So
With the chic, dude, that was awesome.
there were no like profound storylines to be found in this movie, but the story still served itself well enough for me to feel as though I could give it a 7. I want to give it maybe a 6, but I'm going to leave it firmly at a 7 because it served its purpose and still allowed it to feel like it had a spine and had at least some form of linear structure that it was following. Lasting
Yeah.
impression, I want to give just kudos to the fact that the movie has now, as of this year, crossed the century mark and is still being talked about today and still an important piece of cinema. Um, for me, I don't think it'll have a super long lasting impression. It's not the first silent film that I've seen. It's probably my favorite silent film that I've seen. So, for those reasons combined, I give it a 12 out of 15, mostly due to the fact that it has hit the century mark and it's an iconic piece of American cinema. I mean, it's always going to be remembered. For the visual and auditory appeal, um, I actually gave it a 9. I think that all of the practical stunts are so well done, so seamless, and so like easy to watch, where you're not trying to deconstruct or say, "Oh, I know exactly what they did there." And the
Yeah,
score throughout all 44 minutes of it, and obviously it's been superimposed since the original release of the film, but it still worked so well, and it actually added to the comedy of the movie,
yeah,
which I think was really well done. So, gave it a 9 out of 10 there. For the pacing, I give it an 8. There were definitely moments, such as the movie theater scene, where I wanted it to kind of get a move on, but it's hard not to have a quickly paced 44-minute film. That's just the truth of the
correct.
matter. It did drag a little bit in the beginning. At first, I wasn't totally sold on it, but it kept itself up fairly well. Enough, obviously, for me to give it an 8 out of 10. For the acting, like you said, it's really hard to determine. I gave it a 7 out of 10, and I'm questioning myself now, but I gave it a 7 out of 10 um, because is it fair to say, like, there's no dialogue? I
I
mean,
mean, correct. It's a
there
silent film, but no,
there's a
to your
lot of
point, like there's a lot of, you said you've watched silent films where there's a lot of instances where it's scene cue card, scene cue card, scene, like there's not a lot of dialogue, and I feel like Buster Keaton knows that you're not like there's a story to just keep the ball rolling on this movie, but a lot of it is just you want to see crazy stuff on a moving screen.
right. So this movie's not trying to go for all-star performances, right?
Correct.
Um, So I think it's fair to give it that 7 out of 10, and it's not a knock on any of the actors whatsoever. I think everyone involved was incredibly talented. It's just that what was required of them was not masterpiece performances, and for that reason I hesitate to put it on par with films such as Sunset Boulevard, for example, that
Where the
required
acting was the crutch of that movie.
right, or not just the crutch, but where it just required so much of the actors in terms from an emotional standpoint. So it was good, and the acting served its purpose, and there was a lot of good bodily humor, like we've said. But a 7 out of 10 for me feels fair,
Mhm.
and for different reasons than I would give movies with just mediocre acting a 7 out of 10. For suspension of disbelief, I gave it an 8 out of 10. This is a hard one to rank as well because it's a slapstick comedy of its time. So obviously nothing is realistic, so to speak, but it follows its own rules pretty well. Um, I knock it 2 points because of what you said. The dream sequence I found to be kind of confusing at points, and I wasn't really sure where we were going and what the setups were. Also, I think it's just hilarious the fact that the girl, all she had to do was go to the pawn shop and ask, like, who sold you this pocket watch? And boom, mystery solved.
He's
Meanwhile,
like
Buster
that
over
guy
here,
over there.
yeah, yeah, he's literally like walking by as she asked
Hmm.
that. So,
And it's
yeah,
like, oh, she solved the mystery, but let's give you 25 more minutes of just random bullshit
dream
that's
sequence.
going to be
Yeah.
happening. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, yeah, the Sheik did it. I'm sorry.
So, yeah, I mean, I could knock it down to a 7 and still feel okay with it, but I'm gonna leave it at an 8 just because it is a slapstick comedy, so it's allowed to break like these kind of conventional rules. Like it's
Exactly. You want to
it's
know
not
something
taking
funny?
itself
Like
seriously. It's not taking itself
I think one of my favorite scenes from the movie was when they're about to find when they're about to blackmail the kid, is his name in the film. When he puts the banana peel down, and it's just like, okay, the Sheik is gonna walk up and slip on a banana peel, and it's like it's subverting expectations, which you don't really see a lot of in the old days. Because I'm like, that joke wasn't really popularized, like it wasn't really something that everybody was doing, but it's enough of a gag, or it's enough of a popular gag to know that you know what's going to happen, but he still subverts expectations. And I just thought it was,
and yes, in some instances, expectations are subverted, and in other instances, the guy walks by right when she asks who did this. And yes, it's funny, but it's also incredibly convenient. And like that's
oh
kind of
yeah.
where I knock it on the suspension of disbelief. But
It's like,
again,
why couldn't she have just done this at the beginning of the movie?
right. So nothing major, but 8 out of 10 for me there. Originality. So, like you said, obviously, like it's a very original concept for the most part. But it's definitely not the first and only of its time, even to do this level of stunts. And Buster Keaton also, he's one of a few that really specialized in this category. The year prior, you had Safety Last, which is probably one of the most well-known like stunt silent films that there are, that came out in 1923. You had The General, which came out, I'm sorry, yeah, The General came out, I think, a couple years after or a couple years before, that had a similar kind of concept. So the stunt silent film was long lasting and is long lasting, but this isn't the only movie that did that in that era. So that's why I didn't
The
give it a
General
perfect
came
10.
out in 1926, so
26.
2 years
That's right.
after this movie.
Yeah. Safety Last, though, you might be interested in that since you like the kind of silent film stunt work.
Yeah, 1923.
I don't think Buster Keaton was involved in that film.
I don't think
But
so. It doesn't.
nonetheless, there were other films that were doing this at this time that are still prominent today. And for that reason, I give this an 8 out of 10 on originality, because obviously it was a very original take on, like, the Sherlock is used ironically. It obviously doesn't have anything to do with the Sherlock universe, so to speak. But it was still an original film. It's just not a perfect 10 out of 10 in the sense that it wasn't completely revolutionary. And then for my personal attachment, this might surprise you, I give it a 2 out of 5. I'm
Oof.
I'm just really stingy, if I'm being honest. I gave Sunset Boulevard a 1 out of 5. I'm very stingy with my personal attachment. It's only 5 points, man. I got to be careful where I give them.
That's
But
correct. And I mean,
yeah,
I know you like specific movies.
and I liked this film well enough. I definitely enjoyed it. I'm not going to be visiting it, every year or more frequently. I might pop it on if I just get in the mood for that kind of movie, and that's pretty much it. But
Yeah.
even then, I would probably opt to watching a silent film of a similar type that I haven't seen yet. So yeah, I'll give
Yeah,
it a 2
that's
out of 5.
fair.
I don't think it's necessarily going to stick with me for all that long, so to speak. But yeah, it ends
That's
up being a
fair.
70 out of 100, which is the same rating that I gave Sunset Boulevard, 3.5 out of 5 stars.
Correct. So with that, it gives us an average of 71. That puts us at 3.5 stars.
So
So
it's going to end
with
up
that
behind
being
Sunset.
said, yeah, it is going to end up being behind Sunset Boulevard. So far, Sunset Boulevard is our number one picture behind or in front of Sherlock Jr.
Mhm.
Yes. But with that being said, do you have any final thoughts on Sherlock Jr. before we head to the wheel?
Let's see if we can Sherlock our way into 3 straight episodes predicting or
So
mentioning.
so it's funny because I was literally thinking about that while you were saying, like, have we mentioned any other movie on this list? And we haven't.
I don't think
So we haven't spoken anything out into the universe just yet.
that last night I was just scrolling through and I almost put on Lord of the Rings because I haven't seen them yet. And
Oh my God.
and I said, you know what? I'm gonna wait because that's gonna come up on the wheel eventually. So
Yeah, all of them are on it. All three Lord of the Rings movies are on it. So I hope so, because as much as I have loved Sherlock Jr. and like I've had my feelings for Sunset Boulevard, I'm hoping for something in the time where I was born to enjoy it.
yeah, let's shake it up a little bit. Let's see if we can get a more recent, maybe an in color film or something. I mean,
Yeah, so
we're gonna
let's
watch all of these regardless, but I
correct.
always love spinning the wheel.
I need to take a break, homie. But yeah, here we are. There she
All right.
be. But we are putting Sherlock Jr. in the past where it belongs, and we are going to spin the wheel and see what we are going to end up with. You ready?
Yep.
All right, let's hit it. Oh my God. Ah, why is it not showing? Oh my, what is this?
I've never heard of this movie.
I literally never heard of this movie. Who are these people?
All right. So for those of you listening, the movie is 1982's Fanny and Alexander. Drop a comment if you ever heard or if you like this movie. It's directed by Ingmar Bergman. It looks like it's a foreign film. I'll have to figure out which country
Oh,
this is coming from. but it came out in 1982.
Original title, Fanny Och Alexander.
You ready? It is 188 minutes long. So we've got
Oh my God.
we've got our work cut out for us here. It has a 4.4
What was Sunset
average
Boulevard?
rating.
What was it, like a 90-minute film?
It has a 4.4 average rating on Letterboxd and is currently the number 47 film on the narrative top 250 feature films on Letterboxd.
Good
So
God, dude.
none of my friends on Letterboxd have seen it. So this will be
Yeah.
interesting. We'll read
At the time that we picked this list, it was at 46.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, when we did the list, it's at 46, so it has
Okay.
dropped down a spot.
All right. So yeah, anxious, I suppose, to dive into this massive foreign film from 1982.
For the synopsis of it, this is the one on Letterboxd. As children in the loving Echdal family, Fanny and Alexander enjoy a happy life with their parents who run a theater company. After their father dies unexpectedly, however, the siblings end up in a joyless home with their mother, Emile, marries a stern bishop. The bleak situation gradually grows worse as the bishop becomes more controlling. The dedicated relatives make a valiant attempt to aid Emile, Fanny, and Alexander. So this is going to be a very happy movie for sure.
Oh yeah, very.
We're gonna be giggling just as much as we were in Sherlock Jr. Again, I've never heard of this film in my entire life, but again, to your point, it is a foreign film. But oh my God, I was really hoping that we were gonna go three for three and have it just be one of the Lord of the Rings movies. But here we are, dude. Fanny and Alexander.
All right. Well, we by the next episode we will have seen it, and I'm anxious. I have no preconceived notions of this movie, which
Me
is how I
neither.
like to watch a movie. So let's do it.
Correct. No trailers, no stories. We just got the synopsis of it. We're going to dive into this head first and see what is gonna happen with Fanny and Alexander. But until then, again, if you have seen Fanny and Alexander, put a comment down. Let us know what you thought of the movie. Like and subscribe for more of the LetterBros and for our further adventures into the 100 years of film. But Parker, where can people find you?
Yes, of course. You can find me on Letterboxd, of course, at what is my username? Parker_Paget with 2 T's at the end. And I'm thinking maybe we could create a LetterBros official Letterboxd account.
We could.
Well, something
fair, and we can have like our separate reviews on our own personal Letterboxd accounts, and then we can have the ones from the show put on our Letterboxd account. I can make that work.
Yeah, and that way you'll be able to follow our top 100 list live.
Yeah, exactly.
So
you can find me also on Letterboxd at etzio911, SEO911. You can also find me on Instagram and YouTube as Batu Boy. That's a separate channel apart from this. It's a lot more Star Wars related content, but this is where you will find the cinephile side of myself and Parker as we continue this journey. But until then, thanks for watching, and we will see you at the movies.